I don't care what kind of dog it is. It's still a distraction. He can wait outside." The words came flat and cold from the receptionist. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her tone was rehearsed. Franklin Maddox didn't reply. He just glanced down at Tank, his black Labrador retriever, now lying beside his left boot, motionless, alert, perfectly still beneath the polished floor of the waiting room. The coiled leash barely twitched in Franklin's hand. Tank wore the vest. Service animal. Do not pet. But none of that mattered in this place. As Franklin turned to leave, something slipped from his folder. A small blue envelope marked with the logo of the National Veterans Assistance Network. He stooped slowly, stiff knees protesting, and tucked it back in. No one helped. No one spoke. By the corner, a man in a gray jacket stood quietly near the water dispenser. He didn't intervene, but he saw. Franklin opened the glass door. Sunlight flooded in. He stepped out into the heat with Tank beside him, sat down on a bench outside, and waited. Inside, the woman returned to her keyboard. The door clicked shut behind her like nothing had happened. Before we continue, where are you watching from today? This story means more when I know who's listening. I read every comment. Really. Franklin Maddox didn't move like he used to. Each step now came with a pause, a calculation, a conversation with his joints. But he moved. Always. For 22 years, he had been a mechanic for the U.S. Air Force, stationed on runways scorched by Middle Eastern sun, his hands deep in the hearts of machines that couldn't afford to fail. Jets, helicopters, transports. If it had wings, he kept it flying. The work was dirty, loud, and vital. He didn't wear medals, but his name was etched into the safety of men who never knew him. Now, at 70, he lived in a modest apartment above a quiet bakery. No family close by. His daughter, Melissa, called when she could. Her job and 2 kids kept her plate full. He never complained. He didn't believe in adding weight to anyone else's load. Most mornings, Franklin rose before the sun and brewed coffee the old way. Then he'd leash Tank, his service dog, and walk 2 blocks to the park. Not because it was easy, but because Tank deserved a stretch and Franklin needed the air. Tank, a black Labrador with the eyes of someone who understood things too well, was more than a dog. He was assigned, trained, certified, and proven. The VA had matched them 4 years earlier, after Franklin had passed out alone in his kitchen for the 2nd time. Low blood pressure, sudden episodes. Anxiety that came on like engine smoke. Slow, then overwhelming. Tank learned to sense changes in Franklin's body before Franklin did. He would nudge gently, sit in front of him to block movement, or whine softly when something was off. He once barked until a stranger called 911, saving Franklin's life in the middle of a grocery store. They were inseparable. Tank attended therapy appointments, waited patiently at the DMV, sat under pews at the church on Sundays, never barked, never misbehaved, just existed, like a shadow with purpose. Franklin knew how people looked at him sometimes. Old, slow, alone. What they didn't see were the wounds without scars, the ones that wake you at 3 a.m. or make you flinch when a car backfires. So when the doctor's office called a week ago, a new specialist in town, they said, one who reviewed circulation and neurological fatigue, Franklin had hesitated. He didn't like new places, but his daughter encouraged him, and the clinic seemed professional. He'd even called the day before to confirm that Tank would be welcome. "Oh, yes, of course. Service animals are fully allowed." "Thank you for your service, sir," the receptionist had chirped over the phone. That morning, Franklin had shaved carefully, ironed a clean shirt, and packed his folder with all the medical papers, ID, ADA documentation, and Tank certification, just in case. He wasn't expecting red carpet. He never did. But he was expecting basic decency. Now sitting outside that same clinic, sweat gathering under his collar, Tank at his feet, Franklin wondered whether he'd misjudged things again. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't even want an apology. He just wanted to be seen as someone who mattered, someone who had given years for this country, and didn't expect the world to remember, but hoped it wouldn't pretend he never existed. The morning had started well enough. Franklin had left early, like he always did. Better to wait than to rush. Tank walked quietly at his side, his vest freshly brushed, his movements calm and precise. They made a familiar team, one man and one dog, steadying each other. The clinic building was new, all glass and brushed steel, planted firmly on the corner of a gentrified block where old gas stations used to stand. A sign on the door read, "Drayton and Heller, Advanced Vascular and Neurological Care." Franklin paused before entering, checked his pocket. Appointment card, ID, ADA forms, Tank's tags, and folded documentation. He always carried more than he needed. He had learned long ago that respect wasn't guaranteed. You brought it with you. Inside, the air was cool and sterile. A soft instrumental track played somewhere above, the kind designed not to be noticed. The walls were pale gray. The chairs were modern and narrow, like no one was supposed to sit in them for long. The receptionist, a woman in her late 20s with perfect posture and a white blouse too bright for the hour, looked up and hesitated. Her eyes flicked from Franklin to Tank. "Name?" she asked. "Maddox, 915. She typed for a moment. "You're a new patient, right?" "Yes, ma'am." She looked at Tank again, as if seeing a problem that hadn't been mentioned in training. Is he going to stay with you during the appointment?" Franklin nodded. "He's my medical service dog. I called ahead yesterday." Her smile thinned. "Right. It's just that we've had some patients express concern, especially those with sensitivities or allergies. This is a very controlled environment." Tank didn't move. He was already lying down beside the chair Franklin had chosen, body aligned with military precision. "He's trained to stay out of the way," Franklin said softly. "Won't touch anyone. Won't bark. Doesn't shed much either." She stood, walked around the counter, and leaned slightly toward him. "I'm sorry, sir, but would it be possible for him to wait outside? Maybe in your vehicle? Just until your name is called. We'd be happy to let you know when it's time." Franklin looked at her. Really looked. Outside, the temperature was already climbing. Tank wasn't just a helper. He was Franklin's warning system. His anchor. "I don't leave him alone," he said calmly. "That's why he's with me." The woman hesitated. "I understand, but it's about the atmosphere we're trying to maintain. This clinic has a reputation for cleanliness, order. We're not a public hospital. We're private. There are expectations." There it was. The word not spoken. "You don't fit here." Franklin looked down. Tank gazed up, tail tapping once as if to say, "I'm still here." Other patients were starting to notice. A young woman looked away. A man in a suit raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. A nurse passed by quickly without making eye contact. Franklin exhaled through his nose. Slowly, carefully, he gathered his folder. Tank stood without command, sensing the shift. "All right," Franklin said. "We'll be outside." "You don't have to," she began, suddenly unsure. But he was already walking. Outside, he found a bench half in the shade and lowered himself onto it with a small grunt. Tank sat at his feet, alert, but calm. He took a sip from his water bottle, unscrewed the cap, and poured a little into his palm for Tank to lap up. Inside the clinic, the receptionist returned to her chair, and Franklin waited for the heat to pass, for the shame to fade, for someone, anyone, to remember what respect was supposed to look like. Franklin didn't fidget. He didn't tap his foot or check his watch. He just sat. Tank remained by his feet, head lifted, watching the door they had just exited. The sunlight caught in his fur, outlining the soft gray beginning to show around his muzzle. People passed by. A delivery van blocked part of the sidewalk for a few minutes. A jogger hesitated, then veered around them. A mother with a toddler gave them a kind smile. The child pointed at Tank, but the mother gently pulled his hand down. Inside the clinic, the windows were tinted. Franklin couldn't see who was watching, but he was used to that. The people who needed to see him rarely did. He took a deep breath, sipped from his bottle, and uncapped it again to give Tank more water. He had no intention of going back inside. Inside the waiting room, Daniel Reyes sat with one hand on his thigh and the other around his phone. He was in his early 40s, dressed in a gray sports coat and plain slacks. His body was still military even if his clothes weren't, and his mind hadn't unlearned discipline. He had seen the whole exchange, every word, and the quiet that followed. Daniel didn't say anything at first, but he tapped a message into his phone with a precision that suggested habit, not haste. ADA violation. Vet W service dog turned away. Clinic, Drayton and Heller, request response. He attached a photo, Franklin's back as he walked out the door, Tank by his side. Then he waited. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Franklin still didn't move. Tank shifted once, resting his head on Franklin's shoe. Then a black sedan pulled into the loading zone in front of the clinic. Nothing about the vehicle was loud, but it commanded attention by existing precisely where it needed to. The door opened and a tall man stepped out. Major Raymond Lee wasn't in uniform. He didn't need one. A dark jacket, calm eyes, and a slow, deliberate gait were enough. He carried a slim folder in one hand. His ID badge hung discreetly inside his jacket. The other hand remained free, open, but ready. He entered the clinic. The door whispered closed behind him. Franklin looked up briefly, then back down. Tank didn't move. The receptionist saw Major Lee approaching and straightened. She smiled quickly, but it vanished when he stopped in front of her desk without saying a word. Only after a moment did he speak, his tone measured. "I'm here in response to a complaint involving ADA non-compliance," he said. Her eyes flicked to the computer. "Sir, I'm not sure what—" "Veteran, service animal, denied entry, observed by witnesses, documented by former military personnel." Her mouth opened, closed. Major Lee continued, not raising his voice. "Under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, any certified service animal accompanying a qualified individual must be granted access to public accommodations. That includes private medical offices, regardless of decor preferences or atmosphere." A pause. "Where is the clinic administrator?" She hesitated again. "Let me get her." The room was still. One by one, heads turned. The music still played softly from above, but now it sounded out of place. Back outside, Franklin remained unaware of the shift unfolding within. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands together, not angry, not defeated. Just tired. Tank raised his head again, ears slightly twitching, as if he sensed something coming. Franklin reached down and patted the dog's side, slow and steady. "I know, boy," he murmured. "I'm listening too." The clinic administrator arrived 5 minutes later. Her name was Ms. Greer. Polished, precise. Her heels didn't make a sound on the clinic's polished floor, but her presence did. She wore a blazer the color of pearl and a pin that read, "Excellence in Patient Care." She smiled when she saw Major Lee. A practiced smile, slightly uneasy. "Can I help you?" "You can," Major Lee replied, handing her a small printed sheet, a copy of the ADA statute, highlighted and clipped. "Your staff refused access to a service animal accompanying a disabled veteran. He's currently outside. He should be inside." Ms. Greer skimmed the document. "I see. I understand there was some concern from our front desk team. Something about allergies or the comfort of our high-sensitivity patients." Lee didn't blink. "That dog is a medical device. Federal law says it belongs wherever that man goes. This isn't about preference. It's about compliance and respect." She set the paper down, a bit more carefully now. "We're a private practice," she offered, "not government-funded." "That doesn't exempt you," Lee answered. "And you won't want the kind of attention that comes from mishandling a veteran in public. Not in this town. Not this close to Memorial Highway." Meanwhile, Franklin remained on the bench, still watching nothing, still waiting for nothing in particular. Tank had stood and sat again twice, tail occasionally thumping against the leg of the bench. People passed them. One woman offered a polite smile. A man in scrubs tossed a half nod from the parking lot. That was all. Back inside, the conversation changed tone. Ms. Greer leaned forward. "What would you recommend?" Lee didn't hesitate. "You go outside, you apologize. You invite Mr. Maddox back in, personally. You offer him a seat, a cold drink, and your word that this clinic understands the law and honors those who served." She nodded slowly. "And the receptionist? She can come too. This is a learning moment." Lee tucked the folder under his arm. "Or I can file an incident report with the Department of Veterans Affairs and notify the ADA Enforcement Office. And if you need help finding witnesses, I see at least 2 inside already." Daniel Reyes lifted his phone slightly from across the room, just enough for Ms. Greer to understand. She exhaled. "I'll go." 2 minutes later, the glass doors opened. Franklin didn't move. Tank sat up again, alert. His ears pricked. Ms. Greer stepped forward, her heels making contact with the sidewalk now. The receptionist followed behind, slower, less composed. Franklin looked up. "Mr. Maddox," Ms. Greer said, her voice measured, "I want to apologize for what happened earlier. There was a misunderstanding regarding your service dog, but that misunderstanding was entirely ours, not yours." Tank stood beside Franklin now, his body still. "We'd be honored if you would return inside. We've prepared a private room for you both. Cold water. No waiting. And our sincerest respect." Franklin looked at her, then at the receptionist, who shifted uncomfortably, then back at Tank. And finally, he stood, slowly, with the same quiet dignity he'd had when he entered the first time. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. "All right," he said. Inside, the waiting room had changed. Eyes followed them. Franklin's presence was now understood, not because someone had explained, but because someone had acted. The man in the suit stood and offered his seat. Franklin declined, pointing to the far corner where a padded chair now sat beside a shallow bowl of water. Tank trotted over and laid down without needing command. Major Lee nodded once from across the room. Franklin returned it. Daniel Reyes watched the whole scene unfold and allowed himself a quiet smile. For the first time in a long time, Franklin didn't feel like a burden. He felt like part of something that still worked, something that remembered. If you believe quiet dignity deserves to be honored, and that service animals are more than welcome, stay with us. We tell stories for people who still care. The week passed quietly. Franklin returned to his routines: dark coffee, a folded newspaper, slow walks with Tank before the city got too loud. He didn't tell anyone what had happened. He didn't post about it. He didn't seek apologies. But on Friday morning, just after the sun had fully settled over the rooftops, he ironed a clean shirt, clipped Tank's vest with extra care, and took the same path back to the clinic. This time, he wasn't going for a checkup. He was going to see something through. The glass doors opened as they had before. Only this time, no one hesitated. A new receptionist sat at the desk, younger, brighter, less rehearsed. She looked up, smiled without flinching. "Mr. Maddox?" "Yes, ma'am. We've been expecting you." Tank stepped forward with a gentle pace, his tail slow and steady like a metronome set to piece. On the wall beside the check-in counter, a new wooden plaque had been installed. The kind you don't notice unless you're looking for it. But Franklin noticed. "Certified service animals are always welcome here. We honor those who serve, and those who walk beside them." He didn't smile, but he paused, just long enough to read it twice. Then he walked toward the corner of the waiting room, the one that used to be too narrow, too indifferent. Now there was a wide, padded chair. Next to it, a soft gray cushion placed deliberately on the floor. A small brass sign had been affixed to the armrest. "Reserved for those who've waited long enough." Tank moved first, laying himself down with a practiced grace. His eyes closed, his body at ease. Franklin followed, sitting beside him. He didn't lean back, he didn't slump, he just settled. A staff member brought over a bottle of cold water and a ceramic bowl already filled for Tank. No one stared. No one whispered. In the glass reflection, you could see them both. a man who had never asked to be remembered, and a dog who had never left his side, finally sitting in a place that had learned how to see them. If this story moved you, type "still standing" in the comments. Your voice matters, and I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, here's your quiet reminder. Thank you for being here.